Well, Kent Adams here. Welcome to a special. Number one is special guest Tom McArthur, my friend. How are you?
Good morning.
Are you keeping out of trouble?
Well, no. What's the fun in that?
Oh, I don't have the slightest idea what you're talking about. Tom and I, we've known each other for what, like 25 years or so.
I would put a plus on the end of that, but
Yeah.
somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah, you were back at Krem in those days, and
Yes.
you've done a number of things and so forth. And we had this great plan this summer to go down to a favorite place of mine called Bodie, California. And one of us dropped out a month or so ago, but you and your brother went.
We did.
Yes. And so we're going to talk about Bodie, California today on this special because I've been involved over the years. I started going when I was 14, which would be 60-some years ago. And it was not a public park at that time. It was owned by the Kane family and so forth. We're the bankers in town. Bankers always own everything, one way or the other, or the mortgage on it, right? And I kept talking about this, and you even helped me with a brochure and some things when we were forming a foundation about 15 years ago or so. And you finally said, yeah, I want to go see that place.
I'm going to go.
Yes. Tell me, this is headed toward Bodie right now. What did you think when you drove into, because you're kind of used to Northwest weather, but that kind of reminds you of Spokane a little bit, doesn't it?
A little bit. That was just after a rainstorm.
Okay.
And the whole interest in Bodie, California is in the fact that it is a ghost town.
Yes.
One of the largest and best preserved in the United States.
Yes.
So that's the magnet
Yes.
that drew you originally
Right.
and drew me from your stories about it.
Yes.
And ghost towns are towns that used to be a big deal.
Yes.
And then just almost overnight disappeared.
Yeah.
Except they didn't disappear, the people did, but everything they brought there remains.
Yes. Unless
So-
you had some fires, right? And we'll talk about those. You took a picture of the road going in, which I
Yeah.
think is interesting because the last 3 miles is a dirt road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets more and more rustic, so it kind of tunes you into the time.
Yes.
And I took these pictures not only for my personal record, but so that you could take the trip virtually through our effort, because I know how much you wanted to go this year,
Yeah.
and for various reasons, things didn't work
Right,
out.
right.
So here's the arrival experience. And yes, it's hot. And there's our rental car with the doors open so we could cool it down. But if you go back, I don't know if you can go back one picture. If not, there are markers at the side of the road
Yes.
for the snowplow, because the snow is that deep, and you need to know where the road is so you can plow on top of it.
Right.
So 4 dramatically different seasons.
Yes.
And yeah, we had a rental car, but most people in the old days would arrive on horseback or mule.
Right. Right. Well, and during the winter time, which can be from the 1st of November as early and through even April, May, they use what do they call it, a 4-track or something to get in there because they can ride over the countryside to get supplies in and so forth. Because there are California rangers who stay there year round to protect the town and especially the what do you call it, the fire bell.
Oh, yeah.
Which has been stolen a couple times over the years, but always finds its way back somehow. So okay, you and your brother are headed into town and
And it looks like a regular highway,
Yeah.
in the Sierra Nevada mountains.
and this is off 395, which for those of us who live up in Spokane area here, travels all the way up through Spokane and north to the border, I believe even. And so this is off 395. What is it, about 15, 20-mile drive in, if I remember right?
About that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we were taking it slow.
Yes.
And I'd pull over frequently while cars behind us wanted to pass.
And there we are.
Pavement ends. I don't know if you can see
Had I
that.
warned you that the pavement ends?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And we deliberately got an SUV rental car because of that word of caution that
Yeah.
you don't know what shape the road is going to be in.
Yeah, yeah,
It was really in quite good shape.
yeah.
So here's the transition from pavement to pavement ends.
Yes.
And there
And you
is
got
the
to go up a
sign.
little bit of a hill.
Yes.
And then you drop down into Bodie, don't you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Also, a reminder here: no services.
Yeah, that means no auto services, no food. There is water there and bathrooms, but
That's
that
about
is
it.
it.
That's it.
That really is it. Books and
Well, there
and,
is a gift shop.
and a gift shop. There's always a gift shop
That's right.
in the museum. And by the way, thank you for the mug you brought back.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, we both have. You brought one too, so we both have
Bodie, California.
Bodie, California. Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right, so let's move along here. You only have like 200 pictures or something like that.
More than 300 actually, but not all of those were loaded today.
Okay. All right. Actually, what are the mountains in the background? That's the Sierras, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this was, as I say, we went there 2 days in a row, and I took more pictures the second day because I kind of knew where we wanted to get some photographs. So what you can't see in this picture is the smell of the second day after a rain.
Yes.
And the glorious smell of sage, really,
Yes.
really strong.
Yes, and it really is. The whole high Sierras are that way, though. I found that after a rain, you can smell the sagebrush and everything else. So into Bodie, a couple of different plaques and so forth in there. I believe it was 1963 that it became a state park, and put in what they call arrested, not like you're arresting somebody, the sheriff, arrested decay, which means they work on it to this day to keep it as it was in 1963. And you'll see some work as we look at some of the buildings that they've had to prop things up. I remember showing a picture of the town, and one of the picture was old enough, meaning a couple years before there had been a 100-mile-an-hour wind through there, and the building had fallen down. And so Brad, who you met, said, "Well, Kent, that's an old picture because that fell down a few months ago." And so, yeah.
Our staff escort for that tour that day was Brad Sturdivant, who was the executive director of the Friends of Bodie, the Bodie Foundation.
Right.
The organization you helped found
Yes.
years ago.
Yeah, that was a fun experience. And I think, I see on Facebook and other places people go there for the first time and they have the reaction you did. Oh my gosh, it's really a fun place to go. And when we look at, you even see it in that picture, there's only about 8 to 10% of the buildings left because of fires.
Two big ones.
Two big ones, yes. The last one in 1932 started by Bodie Bill. I think he was like 5 or 8 years old. Can you imagine boys playing with matches? I just can't. Anyway.
Human nature hasn't changed much over time.
Yeah. There's actually a picture as you walk into town from the parking lot. And one of the first things you see is the Methodist Church. The Catholics came along, I think, a few years later and built their church. I don't think it's still in existence, as I recall. But did you go directly to the church and look inside? Because it's one of the few buildings.
First big structure that you
Right.
come across as you enter the park. And the front door's open, so of course you have to see
Of course.
what's inside.
Yes.
And I'm not sure what the sequence is of these photographs, if we get to see the inside or not, but it's a church, no longer used as a church,
Right.
more as a lecture hall. But the pews are there, all of the furniture is there from that time.
Yes, and there are certain spots, like here's one, where you've got many of the homes that are still left. And the question a lot of people will say, well, was it just raw wood? No, it was painted back in those days. We're talking about a town that was founded by a fellow in 1859. He didn't know he was founding a town because he actually died in a snowstorm, and his friends found him after the snowstorm. So who knew that it would turn into a town? But in the 1880s, 1890s is really when it thrived and had its own bank and telegraph and all the other things that come with a modern society in the late 1800s. But you got to look in a lot of the windows, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what you'll notice, as you can see on the roof here and
Yes.
some of these structures, a couple of facts to set up why these places look the way they do. One, there is no usable timber or lumber at
Yes.
that elevation. It's at 8,000 plus feet above
Right,
sea level,
right.
which is 3 times as high as Snoqualmie Pass,
Okay.
to give that a local relevance.
Good.
And so there's no trees, there's no wood. You have to import
Yes.
all of your wood. And nothing really grows at that elevation
No.
either, so you have to import all of your food.
Yes.
And in those days, it was canned food.
Yes. Yes.
And what do you do when you have all of these empty cans? You cut them in half, nail them flat, and use them for shingles on the roof.
Yep. Yep. Even on the sides of buildings.
To keep
you
the
probably
wind from
saw
coming through.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you heat your house in those days?
You burned what you could.
Yeah. The wood that was brought in primarily by Indians in the area. They found a way to make some money. And so they brought it in that was as precious as anything.
Sure.
Is to keep your house relatively warm. There's a story, I can't remember the guy that would be stealing wood for his little dugout house, and so someone put a small piece of TNT in the wood, drilled a hole and stuck it in, so they knew exactly who was stealing some of the
Yeah.
wood. I mean, I love the stories. I mean, people did what they had to do back in those days.
Oh,
But
it's a narrative of American capitalism.
Yeah.
You know, everything has a price, everything has a provider, and everything has a buyer.
yeah, well, there's the
interior.
We'll circle back.
There you go, right.
to the to the church, but relatively well preserved inside, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, I've seen lectures done and so forth. Reminds me of what you would see on Little House on the Prairie.
Yep.
And some of the typical westerns, if you will, of the day.
And the church isn't as rough-hewn as the others because the sin came first, then came the salvation. So there's probably a decade or two between some of these buildings and the church.
Yes, I'm sure there was more than a decade. As I said, the Catholics didn't get around to it for a while, so maybe they just felt more comfortable. I don't know, but that's one of the streets that heads up to Bodie Bluff, and we'll see the stamp mill here in a couple of slides, and again, they used whatever they could use. Later on, when the railroad came to the top of Bodie Bluff, they were able to bring in wood that way, and that helped, and supplies.
And on many of the houses, even though the door is locked, you can peek in through the windows.
Yes.
And some of these shots were taken that way, through the windows. And you talk about arrested development. You know, they got up one morning and walked out and kept walking and never came back.
Yeah.
There was some discussion that, maybe they'll strike it big and I'll need to come back. Or maybe they'll strike another load and there's a reason
Well,
to
it was
come
also
back.
taking things out. They were limited to maybe a wagon, and that was it,
Yep.
too, where they had imported stuff. Did you need to repair anything at the sewing machine while you were there?
No, but it is an interesting document to human existence in
Yes.
the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Right.
They were rather forward-thinking. They had telegraph lines into
Yes.
the community so they could get news and information in and out.
Right.
Published several newspapers in
Yes,
town. And
yes.
again, paper also had to be shipped in because there were no trees to make pulp and all of that. All the dishes, every single piece of that town was
You
brought
saw
in.
that a lot in town, didn't you?
All over the place.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just like they up and left one day, which is often what they did.
Exactly what they did. And they had about a dozen or so miles away from town, they found a source of falling water that they put a generation plant in and generated their own electricity. First hydroelectric plant on the west coast of the United States.
Yes.
And the people that were telling me the story on staff chuckled about it, saying they only laid the wire straight.
Yes.
Because they were concerned that if the wire curved, the electricity would jump the track, so to speak.
Yes,
And it would
yes.
never make it into town.
I know. I think we know more than that these days, right?
Just a little.
Yeah.
But you don't know. Okay, let's make it straight.
No, and it was the longest trail, if you will, wrong word, longest string of wire on the West Coast for many, many years. Yeah, fun. Well, there's the mill in the background.
And that's a good shot to explain why there.
Yes.
Why did Waterton Bodie decide that that was the place he was going to dig for gold? Well, if you look at all of the surrounding hillside, as you've seen in these photographs up to this point, they're all of the same color, the same texture, the same. And when he looked at this Bodie Hill, there was something very different in horizontal lines through the earth. And he thought, that's got to be gold. That's got to be silver. That's got to be something interesting.
Yes.
And he never lived to know he was right.
I know. That's what's so sad, isn't it? And speaking of Bodie, he spelled his name different than the town does. Do you know why?
Well, as Body,
Right.
as the first version, I thought, well, people would call him Bodie.
Right.
And phonetically, then it became something else over time, several something else's
Yes.
over time.
Yes.
And I think you were the one that mentioned the story that there was a livery stable.
Yes.
And the guy didn't know how to spell.
He spelled it phonetically.
He painted it on the sign, hung the sign up on the building, and that's what it became. Bodie.
I feel sorry for Bodie himself that he didn't know he had really discovered gold because he was coming back in a snowstorm and trying to survive. And the people with him made it back to the cabin, makeshift cabin, and he didn't. And they found his remains of his body later on, in fact, much later on, that he never knew what this town became. And that's, again, if you look at it, you're looking at about 8 to 10% of what the town was like during its peak times.
And just some numbers, again, that Bodie never knew were going to happen. Population was between 10 and 15,000 people
Right.
at the peak. And when he saw that mountain that looked different, he never knew that they would dig $34 million of gold. And those are 1880s, 1890s dollars.
Right.
By a modern calculation, that's 900 with $1 billion.
Yeah.
Almost $1 trillion of value
Yeah.
from that one mountain.
One of the things that few people really understand is that we often think of San Francisco and its growth after the 1906 earthquake
Yep.
and the damage. When this was all before then, this is a major dollar coming from Bodie that started San Francisco. In fact, people would come out to do the prospecting and so forth. They'd go down the tunnel, or it would be very hot. So I guess we got to behave ourselves because if we go down,
It's down there.
we know it's down there. Yes, and then they would come up to what often was in the wintertime well below freezing, even below zero temperatures, and a lot of people died of pneumonia. And you can see why they're coming up sweating and hot and everything else and going out. And I don't care how you dress up, you're still going to be warm and sweaty and so forth.
And that's what limited the depth of these early mines, is you can only go so far down before
Yes.
you cook.
Yes.
So then they tried to go in horizontally with some of the same issues and challenges.
Yeah.
So they would just start another hole and keep going down.
Now, what's up on the top of the ridge up there?
You'll see different piles of mine tailings.
Yes?
And there were two processes of gold and silver production that were pioneered in Bodie. One
Right.
was to use mercury,
Right.
where you would grind the stone up and hammer it in a mill, turn it into a very fine, not quite powder, but a fairly fine mix, and then soak it in mercury, and the gold would separate from the stone, and that's how you got your precious minerals.
Right.
And the workers at the time remembered wringing out the rags of mercury so that they could reuse that mercury for the next shift.
Yeah.
That was one way to do it, also highly toxic, was to use cyanide.
Yes.
That they had cyanide mills all over town to
Right.
create this, what was really a very powerful poison. But you mix that with the ground up dirt, and the metal separates.
Yeah.
But the problem is, once you get the gold, you don't want what's left. So
No.
you just dump it.
Yes.
And dump it for dozens of years.
Right.
And it becomes this almost bone white pile of soil that is sterile and will be sterile for millennia.
Yeah.
That's the legacy of mining.
Well, one of the things I was going to point out up there is up on the ridge, you will also find the railroad that brought up from Mono Mills across Mono Lake, which is just off 395, and that's where they would bring a lot of the wood up and so forth. That had at least one, if not two, switchbacks, as I recall. During the dead of winter, they couldn't use it, of course, so they'd have to bring the wood and everything early. I love the fact that they were smart enough to figure out that they could put burnt ash and things like that were the charcoal on the tracks as the winter was receding, that it would grab the sun and make the snow melt faster. But you do what you got to do, you know?
Yeah, you use what you have.
Yeah. Amazing. There's the mill again. And
The standard mill is open by guided tour only.
yes, okay. Yes.
And if we have enough time today, we can see some of those interior pictures. A lot of the equipment is all still there in
Yes.
arrested decay.
Yeah.
But can you imagine, working up in those hills, waking up by candlelight when the steam whistle blows for you to go to work, and then you spend all day.
And they were pounding 24 hours a day.
Oh yeah, you're not making money when it's off.
No, no.
So all the noise, people just got used to it.
Yes. I love the hat on the edge of the edge of the chair.
And all of these houses, as rustic as they seem, they had china and silver
Yes.
and linen and wallpaper.
Yeah. And there's the parade.
Looks like a one-holer.
Yes. Well, there were a lot of them, weren't they? Yeah.
Every house had to have, every
Yeah.
house or two would need a place to take care of business.
Did you see in some of the homes a bathtub? Because that was the weekly bath for everybody, that they would run the hot water.
Yep.
And again, the hot water was not plumbed hot water. It was by buckets from the sink and poured in every so often.
But it's what you knew. It's what you did.
Yeah.
It really is impressive how much is there, even though less than half of the original town
Yeah.
survives.
Yeah.
You can see evidence of vehicles, 30s vintage,
Yeah.
that were probably there at the time of the fire, and then they just didn't
Yeah.
remove what was left after that.
Thank you,
The
thank you,
schoolhouse.
Bodie Bill.
Yeah, yes. The schoolhouse off to the right
Yes.
with the mast for the flag on top.
Right.
And there are books in there, and there's a globe in there. And
Right. And right behind it is they store some of the artifacts and things that they don't open to the public and so forth, because every so often they make some changes and so forth. But yes, things are there just as they left.
For many of the years, even though they did have some electric machinery, a
Right.
lot of it was done by steam.
Yes.
And to generate enough steam to run all of those mills would take between 20 and 30 cords of wood a day.
A day.
A day.
Yes.
And each mill.
Yes.
And remember, no trees. So you're shipping in a lot.
That's why they
of
built the
firewood.
railroad, okay?
Yeah.
Because they literally could not keep up with the wagons coming in and so forth. Just amazing how people had to live in those days.
And again, this is the remains of the rainstorm moving out as
Yes.
we are taking some of these photographs.
Yeah, you have to be prepared
You do.
for weather. It can snow. I think it snowed a little bit. I mean, it didn't stick long, just before you went down even. I mean, even in August, it can be miserably cold.
Yeah.
When the weather turns on us.
It was a unique moment when it started to rain because you had maybe 100, 200 people in the park.
Yeah.
So you saw all of these colored jackets and
Yeah.
modern clothing. And then it starts to rain and everybody found a doorway to stand.
Yes.
And the town then became vacant.
Yeah.
It was like a switch.
That's fun. Yes.
And there we are standing each in our doorway looking out at a town with no people in it.
Yeah. As you peered into some of the places, from saloons to hardware stores to you name it, homes, obviously, what was your favorite?
Hard to pick a favorite, except there was one house owned by the Kane family, as I recall,
Yeah.
who was a mayor at the time of the city's past, if I'm remembering.
He was the banker.
Was he banker?
Yes. If you're going to be anything in the town, being the banker is the thing
get
to
into
be.
politics
okay?
and business and,
Yes.
and banking. On the second floor is a window with white lace curtains in it, and there was a member of the park staff. We got to talking, and I said, "So, what's your best ghost story?" And she didn't say there aren't any. She says, "Oh, let me tell you about the one that I saw."
Okay.
Okay, so the second floor of the Kane house, white linen curtains. She sees a woman just standing there, holding the curtains back with her hand. And, the staff person waves, thinking it's a person, right? Because that's who it looks like. And the visage doesn't wave back. She closes the curtains and disappears. And that's a modern day 20-something, clearly lucid person who sees this at Bodie, California.
Did anyone talk about the curse of Bodie?
Is there one?
Yes. What it is if you take something from the park, people have driven halfway across the country or sent it by mail to send it back because something's gone wrong. Of course, you're not supposed to take anything out of the park, but people have sent things back, and just because something's gone wrong in their life, the curse of Bodie.
There it is.
Yeah. And some of these little homes are really pretty small when you think about it. But they spent a good part of the day in the mines or in the saloons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the red light district.
Or the red light district.
For
yes.
some, yeah.
Yes. I heard that maybe was your favorite place.
It doesn't exist anymore, kid.
Oh,
Darn it. No, the red light district, which was typical for old Western towns,
Yes.
burned in the past fires. Also, the Chinatown, which was on the end of the city,
Yes.
was its own community, its own
Yes.
language, of course, and own customs and traditions. But they did a lot of the heavy labor in town.
This is kind of looking from behind you when you were taking this picture would have been the Bodie Bluff with the road up there and everything else in the mines. But if you look in the center of the picture is the current museum and
Where these mugs came from.
right, and all that. Off to the right is the schoolyard. Behind it, the school building. Behind it, down the road toward the parking lot, up the road there, would be the church. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen the town as it was before 1932, because most of it still existed.
Yeah. There, of course, was no way to get aerial shots
No,
back then.
no.
And the few black and white shots that do survive are not of the best quality. It's hard to see what you're actually looking at.
One of the biggest days of the whole year in Bodie was Independence Day. I mean, they brought in trees. They would dig them up and put them around so there'd be trees next to a post, the barber post or whatever it is. That was a big celebration, and the mines would pay early because they paid on the 5th. And of course, Independence Day is celebrated on the 4th, so they would get paid the before so they could do the last minute and spend a little time at the saloon and so forth. Yeah. Do you know what the favorite game was at the saloon?
Game?
Yes.
Drinking game?
Well, other than drinking game, card game.
No.
Faro. Now, we all think by watching the old Western movies that it was poker, right? No. In the Old West, it was Faro, a different game than what we see as tradition in everything from Bonanza to you name it over our lifetime. But that was the game back then. So overall, I asked you this before when I think you were still down there, because I was really worried. I checked in with you several times, as you know.
Yes.
Jealous as all get out.
Of course, I'm sending you pictures all the time.
yes,
Kid, here's what you're missing.
Yes, I
Just
know.
took this picture in Bodie.
I know. And I go, okay, that was so-and-so's home and so on. But I asked you the question, did I overhype it? And your answer was?
You didn't hype it enough.
Okay.
When I was historian at the Davenport Hotel a decade ago, there was a line from a historian that I embraced. And it comes to mind as I look at something like this. History is not about what was. History is about what is. And all the people in these black and white pictures taken years ago or a century ago are not people who died. They're people who lived.
Yes. Yes.
So when you smell the sage, it's what they did.
Yeah.
When you look in the window, it's what they did. Yeah. When you walk those streets, it's what they did.
Yeah. I don't think I warned you about the lynching that went on. Did I ahead of time?
To tourists?
Yeah. No. Yeah. I could have said that too. Yeah. But I mean, there's just so much history, and I knew you loved history, and so forth.
And history yet to be told.
Yes.
When I was in the gift shop getting our mugs, in walks this young lady who described herself as a teacher, talking to the park staff about stories that she could tell her class about the struggles that we're dealing with today.
Yes.
Racism, sexism, whatever the ism is that is in the news tonight, all existed there.
Yeah.
How did they deal with it? How did they process it? What's our legacy from that part of the story? And, what happened in Chinatown, some of that was written, but very little.
Yeah.
The folks of Chinese descent were buried outside of the city graveyard.
Right.
They were not members of the community.
Yeah.
And even in death, they were separate.
Yeah.
So how can we revisit that through our modern eyes and say, what did they get right? And what do we need to change from that heritage?
Right. There was a town down the road which is very hard to get to called Aurora. It's actually over on the Nevada side, if I remember right, and it was built in brick from the beginning, and there was a lot of trade going on between the two towns. In that town, I know there was a lot more taking sides during the Civil War, because that happened in the 1860s, 65, something like that. I don't think there was, as I recall, as much of that going on, because Bodie really didn't start to go until late 1860s, 1870s, 1880s were really the highlight and the best of times in terms of the growth, where they'd have hundreds and hundreds of people come in daily and sleep on the floor of the saloons because there were no beds.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And you look at Nevada, the state next door, battle-born Nevada. It could have gone to the Union, could have gone to the Confederacy, right. And that discussion was happening at the time all of this was coming along.
Yes. Well, let's give folks maybe a little idea of where this is. This is about, 3 hours south of Reno on 395?
The closest good commercial airport into which you could fly would be Reno, Nevada.
Right.
Where my brother and I rented a car and then drove south.
Right.
And you can do it all in one day, but it's best if you split it up.
Yes.
It's a really nice place to stop and visit in Carson City, Nevada.
Yes.
It's the state capital.
Right.
And
a lot of history there.
A lot of history there, yep. If you ever bought a silver dollar or a gold piece minted at the Carson City Mint, that building is still there.
Yeah.
That press is still there. So you can see where your coin was born.
Yeah.
And then go up into the mountains to see where the minerals came from that created that money.
Right. Do you recommend people go?
Oh, yeah. Yes, no hesitation there.
Yeah.
Oh, you might want, if this was your first experience with a ghost town, it's visiting the top shelf first.
Yes.
Everything else is going to be on a lower shelf.
Yeah.
So what you might want to do is start closer to home. Maybe visit a Garnet City in Montana, which is just a short drive here from Spokane. Visit Garnet first, or something similar.
Right.
Get into the tune and the rhythm of a ghost town.
Right.
And then once you have kind of the basics figured out, go and listen to the symphony.
Yeah. And you visited Virginia City, the one in Nevada. I know there's one in Montana as well, not as big. And it's kind of modern day, because you can drive down the main drag and everything else.
It's almost too easy to get there.
Yes, half hour, 45 minutes from Reno and Carson City and so forth. And it's fun to go sit where Mark Twain sat and see where he worked at the Enterprise and all of those kinds of things. But it disturbs me that you're seeing people come by in a car, and there are no cars really in Bodie itself.
Service vehicles, but they don't
Right.
drive through the park.
Right, right, right. It's
Yeah.
a walking one, as you mentioned before, and as I tell everybody, no services. If you got a problem with your car, sometimes your cell service works. Now, you might have had better luck than I did, because I haven't been there for like 12 years or so.
There really isn't any in
No.
the park. If a member of your group uses a wheelchair or needs access,
Yeah.
they have wheelchairs with these big balloon tires, almost like a lunar rover.
Oh, nice, okay.
So that you get over this kind of
Yeah,
landscape.
you see, folks, you see the rocks in the road, and that's what you're walking on. You really are, and so it's not for the timid.
Oh, but they do have adaptable equipment
Good.
to help you access these roads.
That's nice. That's nice. Great. All right, Bodie, California.
Yeah,
Once a
it's
population
a real place.
of around 10,000 people, and as I said, and I've mentioned to you several times, really helped build San Francisco before the earthquake, and so forth. In fact, a big trip out was to go down to the big city in San Francisco, several days trip, as you can imagine, over the mountains and all of that. This is on the east side of the Sierras. Yosemite is the east entrance to Yosemite is back out at Mono Lake and just a few miles, so maybe 30 miles from where this is. Then south of that is Mammoth Lakes and all that goes on there. This town of Mammoth has a great ski area, very popular, probably on the same ground and equivalent to Aspen and that sort of thing. Pricey homes and so forth. So it's a great area. It's my favorite area. And as I said, I started going there at age 14 and just fell in love with the whole area. Back in those days, I actually fished, but not here at Bodie. You had to import everything, but they did. They imported some of the best of things, that they could have oysters at any time in some of the restaurants and so forth. And I think a meal was like 50 cents or, I mean, just unbelievable. That was the time back then. Thanks for bringing the pictures and for liking it like I did.
Yeah.
Okay.
It gets to be a part of you.
It does.
You get to know these people through their stories,
Yeah.
and that's the best part. Is that history is what is.
Yeah. Now it's rough in the wintertime to get in and to get out, and for the rangers that are there year round. But it's one of the most asked for locations for the Park Service down there. To be at Bodie is sort of a special place. So, all right. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for the introduction to
All
a new
right.
friend.
Yeah. Take care, everybody. Have a good day. Plan to go visit Bodie next year. Take care.